friends, here we are again today for another video recipe. This week's recipe is going to be a quick mixed beans, chickpeas, lentils soup with garlic croutons. For this recipe we need a can each of Italian cannellini, borlotti and butter beans, a can of chickpeas and a can of lentils. The most important thing is that you really rinse them carefully so that you take off all excess salt. Then we need 2 medium small potatoes diced, 2 garlic cloves, 1 for the soup and 1 for the croutons, sage and rosemary, about a tablespoon of Italian tomato paste, and about 1/4 cup of Italian strained tomatoes, and then a little bit of olive oil to drizzle on top of our soup when we're done. Now, that's not all. We have about 8 to 10 cups of chicken broth. If you want to keep this totally vegetarian, use vegetable broth. So we'll be back in about a few seconds to start with our recipe. So here we are. First thing we're going to do will be stirring in our broth the 2 tomatoes. And we will add, medium-high heat. We'll add the potatoes, which are technically the only things that really need to cook. Okay, all the splashing wasn't supposed to be here, but anyway. And 1 of the garlic cloves and the herbs. So now that all our tomatoes are nicely melted, technically, into the soup, we'll add all the beans, but try not to splatter too much. The lentils and the chickpeas. Now this will make a huge amount of soup. It's about probably for 8 to 10 people. And if you cook pasta in it, it may feed even more people. Right now we have to let it boil until the potatoes are cooked, which may take about 10-15 minutes. My pieces were quite small. Once the tomatoes are cooked, we will be back together for the final parts of the soup. This really isn't a very complicated soup, and it's a real quick one. So we'll get together again in about 10-15 minutes. So here we are again. Our soup is basically cooked, so we're gonna make the croutons. I already toasted a couple slices of bread, which are enough for a person. You cut a garlic clove and then you just brush it on the bread. Bread roughness will do the trick. And then cut it in squares, sort of squares. And it doesn't really have to be perfect. Put them on the bottom of your bowl. And you can reuse the garlic for anything else you might think of, actually. And here you go. Now I didn't mention salt in the ingredients list just because if you're using a broth, it's already salty, so you don't really need it. So now next step, because I like my soups kind of creamy, I'll blend a few of the beans and chickpeas together with the garlic clove that I went digging out. So beat a broth, otherwise it's not gonna work. You can do this in a regular blender, with an immersion blender, it doesn't really matter. And you can also not do it at all if you don't like it. Not too many, you don't really need too many beans, just that little to creamy it a little. And stir in. And then we can proceed with our soup. Dig down, because all the beans and lentils and chickpeas are way down. And then some of the broth, which is going to be absorbed by the bread. And drizzle a little bit of olive oil on top. Now, many recipes call for chopped garlic, sage and rosemary to saute in olive oil before you add everything else. I don't like doing that. I'd rather use my olive oil raw on top of the soup. So, wow. Here's our soup. And see, broth, it's still a little runny, so with this quantity you might want to cream a little bit more of the beans. But if you add pasta or rice to the soup, leave it pretty much as is, otherwise it's gonna stick like crazy on the bottom of your pot. So I hope you'll enjoy making this recipe, and I'll see you soon for another video recipe.